Hello, I'm Jim McGinnis. Hope this finds you well. This is Notes on Justices, Judges, and the Constitution. We need to protect the courts in order to protect the Constitution. In truth, James Madison, the father of the Constitution, made no bones about limiting the power of the popular will in a democracy. Majorities had to be checked just as stringently as any other potential tyranny. His Constitution brilliantly moderated those tendencies. It is vital to remember that democracy is based on the rights of each individual. It doesn't rest upon the freedom of most or some, but each. The goal of a democratic government should not be simply to arrive at the most popular solution or resolution. Majority rule must always be seen as the last resort in efforts to solve a problem or make a decision. 51% passes a law through Congress. We would rather have 67% or more, but most times 51 is the best we can do. Constitutionalism is about limited government. Much of the 8,000-word document is riddled with phrases of constraint, stating what government can't do rather than what it can. Make no law, shall not be abridged, prohibited, or infringed, cannot suspend, and so on. Because threats to our freedom can just as easily come from populist movements as from a dictator, the founders vested power in judges and the courts in order to protect us from tyrannical majorities. True, it was a great leap of faith, but for the most part, the judicial system has been our saving grace. It's safe to say that the role of the Supreme Court was not clearly defined by the founders, but its role has evolved. Many times in our history, it has been the court that has led us through popular obstructionism and brought us back to the principles of the Constitution. When the leadership in the states, in the Congress, and in the presidency repeatedly dropped the ball on civil rights and civil liberties issues, it was the court that educated us on the Constitution and ultimately implemented policies more closely aligned with the founding document. Through some thorough detective work, Gary Wills challenged the myths surrounding the framers of the Constitution. Revisionist arguments have often been undermined by the simple demographics of the Philadelphia Convention. The Federalists, those supporting the Constitution, were the young guns. They were men of the younger generation. Men like John Marshall and Alexander Hamilton were greatly influenced by their Revolutionary War experiences. They fought alongside Washington and saw many of his efforts frustrated by a weak and ineffective government. Marshall will go on to become the greatest Supreme Court justice, defining the role of the court while serving on the bench for 35 years. The 4 of the 9 Federalist leaders were still in their 20s at the time of the Philadelphia Convention. Other notions challenged by facts. If the Constitution was in fact crafted to defend the rich minority against the masses, why were the 7 who walked out of the convention among the richest in America? Why was it that the 3 states that unanimously ratified the Constitution were controlled by farm interests? Why was the opposition to the Constitution led by men who already held power and privilege in the state? I cannot recall a good Supreme Court decision that was popular in its time. For that reason, we must guard against moves to weaken the court because certain rulings go against popularly held opinions. 1912 saw the biggest challenge to the court. The most radical proposal in a package of constitutional reforms was the recall of judicial decisions. Judicial recall would give the power of the majority to change the fundamental meaning of the Constitution. Proposals didn't stop there. Another plan was a change in the amendment process, which would allow simple majorities to alter the Constitution. Believing that no law or policy was important enough to damage the Constitution, Senators Elijah Root and Henry Cabot Lodge separated themselves from such reforms during the 1912 election campaign, even though they came from their party. Along with others in the Republican Party, they were deeply disturbed by the attack on the moderating influences of the Constitution, and Root eloquently defended the practical wisdom of the founders. He said, "In our Constitution, we have set up a barrier against ourselves, as Ulysses required his followers to bind him to the mast, that he might not yield to the song of the siren. So the American democracy has bound itself to the great rules of right." Fair winds.